Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about chronic traumatic encephalopathy, better known as CTE. And for those that are aware of CTE, we've probably seen it in the news over the past few years, especially if you are a football fan, specifically with Antonio Brown and some other players that we've seen that have retired and are coming to the NFL looking to either sue or talk with them about problems that they are having with their head injuries. So CTE, along with other physical sports such as boxing, UFC, which a lot of our culture has sort of integrated as a part of our entertainment systems, a lot of physical sports. So CTE is something that has been progressively gained a lot of more traction and interest in studying, especially with the overaccumulation of our athletes that have started to show signs and symptoms of CTE. So, what is CTE? We did mention that chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, and it is an overall brain tissue degeneration and atrophy. So we see on the picture on the right that, at least in the left part of that picture, that is a normal brain. That's what a normal brain is supposed to look like in humans. And on the right, we have advanced CTE, and a lot of that brain tissue is atrophied and has degenerated. So this is both on the cortex, there is a smaller lining of the cortex, and in the white matter as well. So we notice that the ventricles are a little bit larger. There's just a lot more space and a lot less of the actual brain tissue, which leads to a lot of cognition problems. So we see typically with CTE, a lot of movement problems such as tremors and Parkinson's-like symptoms, which we'll touch upon a little bit. But they are linked primarily to repetitive head trauma. So it is in the name chronic traumatic encephalopathy. So it's a lot of traumatic blows to the head that would cause this disease. And we see this most commonly developed from physical sports, like we had mentioned, with either football, boxing, UFC, rugby, any sort of event in which our heads are constantly going under some sort of trauma or physical event. So what are the signs and symptoms of CTE? In this paper here from 2015 that evaluates the overall neuropathology of chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Symptoms of CTE include the behavioral and mood changes, so both, and memory loss, cognitive impairment, and dementia-like symptoms. So it is really interesting to note that there are behavioral and mood changes. It's not just the fact that you lose the cognition, such as in diseases like Alzheimer's or dementia. There is a very big correlation and factor to behavioral and mood changes in which you would almost act like a completely different person, which we will mention some examples a little bit later. But some other examples of signs and symptoms, memory deficit. So again, like dementia-like symptoms, abnormal behavior. So usually erratic and almost dangerous, very unusual to what you normally be like, and the people close to you would probably see that, and mood disturbances. So the pathology of CTE, you're probably wondering, well, how does this develop? How do we go from that normal brain to the atrophied and degenerated brain? And this is from the overaccumulation of a protein called tau. And tau is normally found in brain tissue on the microtubules and is responsible for maintaining the structure of the brain cells. And what happens with CTE is that when there's repeated traumatic physical blows to the head, there's an overaccumulation, or at least a higher recruitment, to create tau. And this is to sort of strengthen the brain so that whenever it does undergo those physical events, it will be stronger and there'd be less space for it to move around. So it's almost like a concussionary sort of mechanism where all of the brain tissue and the microtubules on those brain cells would be held tighter so they don't completely snap and break, and we lose cognitive and function right off the rip. But again, too much of a good thing is a bad thing. So with chronic traumatic encephalopathy, what happens is so much of an accumulation with this tau protein that they get bundled up together and sort of like in a web-like function. So Those are called tau neurofibrillary tangles, at least when they are in neurons, and they are also called glial tangles when they are formed in astrocytes. So this overaccumulation of tau gets bundled up with each other, and it creates this web-like structure that would end up causing some degeneration of either the astrocytes or the neurons in the brain. The overall mechanism with the death of these neurons specifically and tau isn't well understood. We just know that in CTE, there is always a prevalence of tau overaccumulation on these neurons. Is it there to help? Possibly, maybe at the start. Is that what is causing necessarily the death of neurons? That mechanism isn't well understood. So this is sort of the 4 stages of CTE. And again, it usually leads to dementia or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. The regular or more common, I should say, neurodegenerative diseases are usually seen with advanced CTE, just because it gets to a point where the diseases almost blend into each other with their signs and symptoms. So at the start, there are no symptoms. It's just you might have a concussion, but essentially there is an event in which your head is undergoing repeated blows, but there's no symptoms of memory loss, erratic behavior, nothing like that. It's just you're getting hit hard. You might have some headaches, but there's no real signs and symptoms of CTE. Then there's stage 2, which comes very interesting mood and behavior changes. So rage, impulsivity, and depression, which are very opposite on their spectrum, with rage and impulsivity versus depression. Really interesting association with the varying emotions and conditions here, which is what I find to be one of the more interesting aspects of CTE. It's because if someone's normally level-headed, you might see them just become very impulsive, angry, doing things that they don't normally do, but then also have that combined with the fact that they might have depressive disorder, which is really interesting. You don't really put the two together with impulsivity and depression. However, it is just the more erratic and unusual changes overall, and this might be seen in different people in different amounts. So then after that comes confusion and memory loss. Again, at this point, the memory portion of the brain, the memory sections of the brain with the neurons that travel to it are becoming degenerated. So with that becomes a loss of memory and cognition, as well as just overall almost brain fog or just straight up confusion. And again, just from severe deinnervation to these parts of the brain. And then after that, it just leads to advanced dementia, which is just a complete, well, not complete, but very high amount of atrophy to the brain. So what is CTE? And well, not what is CTE, but why is CTE something to care about? And I had mentioned before, at least I alluded to it, there are certain more popular examples of CTE, at least in the mainstream media. So this first one is Antonio Brown, and he is an NFL football player. This hit right here is said to be the main event that caused him to, or at least caused many people to believe that he does have CTE. And the reason for this is he was a very good football player, but at least to the extent of NFL football players, normal. He behaved in a normal way. He just got onto the field, did his work, and succeeded at a very high level. After this hit, in which he got knocked out and actually had to get taken out of the game, and he was out for the rest of the season, a few years later, and we're seeing a bunch of impulsive spouts and bursts from Antonio Brown, especially accumulating to his last moment on an NFL field, in which during the middle of a game, he took off his uniform and just started like taunting and baiting the crowd, sort of cheering him on as he ran off the field in the middle of a game. So really unusual behavior, really impulsive. There's been a lot of other bouts in the media, which I'm not going to get into, but it can bleed into personal life, in which there's been a lot of almost criminal accusations against him for some of the behaviors that he's going through. So CTE is really something that bleeds out into just everyday life. It's something that we should be looking out for in our athletes, and more specifically, anybody that's just going under repeated traumatic head physical events. And then the second one below is Muhammad Ali. And now, while he does have Parkinson's, um, I do wonder, or at least speculate, if CTE is actually a main player in this, or at least maybe if he had CTE and then which led to Parkinson's, because again, he's in a very physical sport in which the main goal is to hit your opponent in the head and knock him out. So throughout his whole life, he's getting hit in the head. He's undergoing these chronic traumatic head experiences, and eventually just led to a complete lack of cognition and overall quality of life. So Muhammad Ali is a very good example of that. Someone who was completely at the top of their game, someone you would look up to physically and mentally. And just to see where that ended up taking him at the end of his life was quite a eye-opening and saddening experience. So if this is something that we can look out for in our younger athletes and athletes right now so that we can take steps to prevent CTE from occurring, that would be for the benefit of overall quality of life in the later years, especially. And again, following that theme, there is no treatment for CTE. While symptom therapy for use of Alzheimer's or dementia or other neurodegenerative diseases might be of benefit, there is no real direct cure to CTE. We are just starting to begin to understand what CTE is and how it develops. So as more research is conducted on CTE, I'm sure that there will be more targeted therapies. But in terms of prevention, there has been a widespread rule and almost societal, or at least from an entertainment standpoint, acceptance of rule changes to make physical contact to the head and or neck area strictly enforced. So at least in the NFL, they have much more strictly enforced penalties and a wider range of them, whether that's a deliberate hit to the head penalty, which would deter players from going to hit into the head. And they have targeting, so you cannot target toward the head and neck area. So there's a lot of rule changes that are being enforced as more of these accusations coming out toward the NFL are, and sort of evaluating the safety of the game itself. And then on top of that, there's a bunch of headgear and almost, I guess, padding on top of helmets already that are already padded on the inside that are starting to be rolled out in all aspects of sports. So you have an example of the top picture here of a quarterback that is wearing a helmet that has extra padding on top of it. And a lot of these players walk around almost looking like Toad from Mario Kart, but it is extra padding to the head. And they do wear this in practice, which would take away a lot of the hits to the head if practice already is becoming less contact as is, but adding that extra padding on top of the helmet in case there is a hit to the head could end up saving someone from a more severe event that might lead to CTE. And then on top of that, at young age, we see this rolled out in Pop Warner football, boxing classes, all boxing matches now that are up to either the age of 18 or 21, I forget which one, do include headgear. So this is an Olympic junior bout in the boxing ring in the bottom picture here. And even at the Olympics, they're wearing headgear. So it's not just a straight raw, no headgear type of boxing match. So even in championship caliber matches and beyond, and amateur matches as well, headgear is being required. So it'll be really interesting to see what other prevention techniques that come out, how it will affect sports in general, the entertainment aspect, and also for the benefit of and the safety of the players and their families as well. So thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy.